What if the Great Game turned hot? So the Great Game was a political and diplomatic confrontation that existed for most of the 19th century between the British Empire and the Russian Empire over Afghanistan and neighboring territories in Central and Southern Asia. Russia was fearful of British commercial and military inroads into Central Asia, and Britain was fearful of Russia adding the jewel of the crown, India, to the vast empire that Russia was building in Asia. This resulted in an atmosphere of distrust and the constant threat of war between the two empires. So the Great Game began on the 12th of January 1830, when Lord Ellenborough, the president of the Board of Control for India, tasked the Governor General to establish a new trade route to the Emirate of Bukhara. So Bukhara is located in Central Asia. Britain intended to gain control of the Emirate of Afghanistan and make it a protectorate, and to use the Ottoman Empire, the Persian Empire, the Khanate or Khiva, and the Emirate of Bukhara as buffer states between both empires. This would protect India and also key British sea routes by stopping Russia from gaining a port on the Persian Gulf or the Indian Ocean. Russia proposed Afghanistan as the neutral zone. The results of British invasions of Afghanistan include the failed First Anglo-Afghan War of 1838, the First Anglo-Sikh War of 1845, the Second Anglo-Sikh War of 1848, the Second Anglo-Afghan War of 1878, and the annexation of Khiva, Bukhara, and Kokand by Russia. So British influence was to be extended into Afghanistan and it was to become a buffer state. Their intention to invade was clear, and in the First Anglo-Afghan War, the British marched into Afghanistan and arrested Dost Muhammad, the leader of the Afghans, sent him into exile in India, replaced him with the previous ruler. However, the British were easily defeated by the Afghans, who outnumbered them heavily, and the army of the Indus, as they were called, just perished. So Dost Muhammad, the leader of the Afghans, is reported to have said, "I have been struck by the magnitude of your resources, your ships, your arsenals, but what I cannot understand is why the rulers of such a vast and flourishing empire should have gone across the Indus to deprive me of my poor and barren country." So basically, the British tried to invade Afghanistan yet failed. This shows that the mountainous terrain and the logistics of invading such an area basically render it unconquerable from outside powers. So if the Great Game were to turn hot, that is, Russia and Britain were to go to war over the tensions in the region, the point of divergence, I will see it, is the Panjdeh incident of 1885. So the Panjdeh incident of 1885 was a diplomatic crisis between Britain and Russia caused by the Russian Empire's expansion southeast toward Afghanistan and India. After nearly completing their conquest of Central Asia, the Russians captured an Afghan border fort. Seeing a threat to India, Britain basically just threatened war, and the matter was only settled by diplomacy. So the effect was to stop further Russian expansion in Asia, except for the Pamirs, and to define the northwest border of Afghanistan. So it seems like there was a point where the Great Game could have turned hot, and that point is the Panjdeh incident. Now, if Russia and Britain were to go to war, the clear winner in this situation is Britain. In the late 1800s, Russia was still not industrialized. It was not the industrial power that the Soviet Union would later become in the 20th century. Russia was poor, a land whose serfs had only been freed a few decades ago, who was still backwards in comparison to other European powers. It was seen as this giant foreign behemoth of the West. So, this situation, if Britain and Russia were to go to war, they would cross Afghanistan. Yet the logistics of the land were terrible, and we would have likely witnessed a great loss of life on both sides as they tried to maneuver and fight in this war. The British would probably expel the Russians out of Afghanistan, and They could keep a tenuous hold on Kabul. However, this hold, I would emphasize, is tenuous because Afghanistan was a hostile nation, full of tribes and other factions that are competing for power, and this would not suit the British that well. So overall, there will be no long-lasting effect. The British couldn't keep Afghanistan, and Russia would be vastly overstretched if it were to even make inroads into Afghanistan. And to think of it conquering India, oh, no way. Russia was already enormous at that time, and to fight a war so far on the frontier would be basically impossible in terms of logistics alone. When the Great War rolls around, World War I, Britain will be reluctant to join Russia as an ally, even more so than it was in our timeline. There was this sense of Russophobia in Britain in our timeline, yet this feeling will be amplified in this alternate timeline. The treaty with Russia would be more of a treaty of convenience rather than anything else. When Russia is crushed as it was in our timeline, Britain would immediately halt any diplomatic connections with Russia, like they did in our timeline. So overall, even if the Great Game were to turn hot, it would only be a minor skirmish in the borders of Afghanistan, and nothing really major that has an effect on history. So that's my take on the topic. Tell me what yours is in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe. This is Scarlet the Road, signing out.
The Russians called it the Tournament of Shadows. The British now remember it, thanks to Rudyard Kipling's later writing, as the Great Game.